In 2007, Mexico started a program for the country of Belize to offer free textbooks for children. And on the one hand, parents were very excited because textbooks are expensive, and so it was very nice to kind of get free educational materials. But when the materials arrived, when the textbooks got there, parents and teachers noticed there was like a weird feature specifically on the maps in the textbooks.
What happened was that, of course, before school started, the teachers had to check it out, and there was a workshop and everything, and they're looking at these textbooks, and there's no border between Mexico and Belize, so we guess that the publishers probably believed that they were doing this for Mexico, not for another country, and they just included Belize as part of the country. And in addition to that, in some of the social studies textbook itself, the name Belize wasn't even included.
In case you don't have a good handle on Central American and Caribbean politics, this is a big deal. And it goes all the way back to the political subjugation of these regimes under different colonial powers. Mexico and Guatemala were colonized by Spain, while Belize was colonized by the British Empire. For many years, the region was implicated in the proxy conflict between these two empires. For example, in the 1700s, you had British pirates using Belize as a staging area for plundering Spanish ships. But the legacy of colonization continued throughout the region's history. By the early 20th century, Mexico and Guatemala had become independent nations, while Belize was still a British colony. For decades, Guatemala attempted to claim the territory of Belize, first through treaties with the British, and then by threatening to invade the territory in 1948, 1951, and 1958. Even once Belize became an independent nation in 1981, Guatemala still laid claim to much of the territory, distributing maps that show Belize as either fully or partly annexed as Guatemalan territory. Given this long history of border threats and arguing for their independence, you can see how a missing border on a map would be a big deal.
Leon, this idea that we don't even exist in Central America, that's a traumatic event for a country that, had received independence some, 20, 30 years before.
That was Therese Pennell, author of Designing Interculturally, Adopting a Social Justice Framework for Seeing Difference. In the article, she talks about the need to include things like cultural history and cultural trauma in the way that we talk about intercultural design. And of course, this is adding on to the work that's already been done in TechCom about intercultural design. Even in almost any textbook that you pick up about TechCom, you're gonna find some chunk that talks about designing and writing for global audiences. But as Therese points out, even recommendations and lessons with the best of intentions can still lead to reductive ways of talking about intercultural communication.
We'll see this borrowing of theory coming into technical communication classes about how international communication works, right? Then the problem with that is it's very general and sometimes stereotypical. So they'll be talking, this group does X, Y, Z. And our students will be saying, that group does this. So as if, there is, it's a monolith rather than we have groups who have varying personalities that come along with that. So there's this idea that, that they don't, in Asian cultures, they don't look in the eye, they don't have direct communication. It's like going around the idea. Even in the Caribbean, where there is a large variety of languages spoken, and often, it's looked as a monolith, like, they speak a variation of English, and that's not commonly the case.
So my favorite example, at least with the kind of like homogenized idea of culture, is when it comes to color. Because if you go and you Google cultural meanings of color, you get some of the most broad brush strokes of meaning you have ever seen. Like, take something like this: how translating colors across cultures can help you make a positive impact, right? One of those general marketing articles that you would kind of find. They got color across cultures, and they go red, blue, green, all the colors you could imagine. And then they give some of the most general descriptions you could give, right? So, like, they say, in Western countries, so, like, so many countries, red evokes excitement, danger, urgency, and love. And in some small ways, that is true, right? We can think about stop signs and Valentines and all that good stuff. But about the other bevy of red logos and associations that we might see in quote-unquote Western countries that are going to have vastly different meanings depending on what location that you're in, right? So if we take that, if we just say, okay, it's more complicated in the Western countries, what do we do with something like red is associated with purity in India, right? Especially when we think about India, there are specific cultural zones, right? More than 1 billion people, and with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 distinct cultural areas with extents and centers and all kinds of stuff that I don't know about because I accept that India is more complicated than one cultural meaning. So one of the challenges then, I think, of a good technical communication class is trying to kind of have students learn how to think about intercultural audiences in a deeper way than just Chinese audiences, Indian audiences, and these big kind of like homogenous groups. Because what we don't want is people one day going out into the world and creating documents like Mexico creating those textbooks for the people of Belize, right? Treating people of Belize as if their cultural codes don't matter and do not exist. So how do we do that? One framework comes from an article by Charles Kostelnik, where he advocates for having students go and find artifacts, so like websites, documents, that represent the kind of like design sensibilities of a particular culture, and then students would analyze why that document is the way it is. So Kostelnik provides some questions that students should be asking about the document, some of which are kind of like your basic rhetorical situation stuff, where it's where did the document come from, who is the audience of the document, but then also he asks students to think about what visual elements, so like the pictures, the icons, are going to look different or strange or exotic about the document, and how do they differ from what kind of like students would normally expect with it. And the important thing here is that all of those questions are kind of supported by research, right? So it's not just students coming up with their own ideas of what is different or strange about this, but trying to actually do research on that culture to understand it in a deeper way and kind of like do it in terms of actual designs instead of just red means danger, blue means friendly, green means the banana's not ripe yet. So in Therese's article, to bring us back to it, she argues that Kostelnik's questions are a great starting point, but that we can kind of do better and build on top of them by having students think about the cultural history and the cultural trauma that might influence the way particular people look at those designs. So specifically, Therese is kind of adding this question of what events in this culture's history reveal a social upheaval marked by violence or injustice? And then 2, how does that event impact the communication strategies that are going on in that culture?
Almost every country in the world had to fight to exist, and it does affect their cultural practices, their beliefs, their values. So I was thinking, I think one of the biggest ways that students can really understand fully appreciate a culture is to understand that historic conflict that also had an effect on what or how their cultures came about. What Kostelnik does, he has a question that asks, what is this culture as well, right? But it seems more like periphery, that okay, we could figure that out as we look, while I'm asking that this additional question be asked so that students could research it, so that it's not just something that we'll pick up from looking at these artifacts, but do the contextual analysis. So this is the artifact. Let's see what's happening that caused this artifact to be produced. So it's asking for more, I guess, labor on behalf of the student, especially if they don't belong to that specific culture. So it does add to it, and it gives that social justice aspect that is implicit in what Kostelnik offers in the questions, and the question that I add is more of an explicit one.
One of the things I really like about this article is the way that it kind of takes the research lineage of visual rhetoric and kind of like the way we've taught visual rhetoric and really starts to push it in that direction of social justice in a really pragmatic way. But along with that kind of pragmatism also opens a question of where are we kind of getting these visual artifacts to analyze in the first place?
Yeah, dig a little deeper, right? One of the things that in the Kostelnik article, we're studying artifacts, and usually if you're asking students to search for an artifact, you look at mainstream areas where we have access to them, and that would be, let's go to the internet. And usually it is the groups with resources that would be able to develop artifacts that are easily accessible. So one of the things that I would encourage students to look for are artifacts that are not as it should be accessible still, but not as mainstream as looking at a website. Let's see. We have access to the Library of Congress, for example. We have our libraries, our university libraries, where we could find artifacts in different areas where we'll probably have to go there physically and look at photographs, look at newspapers.
If you teach visual rhetoric, or you, like me, just hate super reductive ways of talking about intercultural communication, I strongly recommend you check out Therese's article. I think it's great. I think it gives some good theoretical background on this kind of like social justice inflection to visual rhetoric, but also I think it just gives some practical teaching applications that are just really useful for the classroom. And other than that, if you are interested in articles that do not center kind of a white American view of TechCom, check out the videos that I've linked that we've done before. We've highlighted other articles in the field that have been more recent that kind of show that same energy. And there's a lot of great work out there that I think we can invest our time in. And with that, I would like to give a big shout out to Therese for working with us, for doing this video. It meant a lot to be able to sit down with her and talk through the article. And also thank you to you for watching this video. I hope you have learned something. As always, if you can give us a like, a comment, a share, we would much appreciate it. And we will see you in the next video.